Welcome to my channel. Today I'd like to show you how to create a lovely crackled background on fabric using a flour and water resist. So in my little container here I have 4 heaped teaspoons of flour, and as you know it's better to add water to the flour than to actually put the flour into the water, which goes lumpy. And you want to just slowly start getting this to form together into a lump and then gradually soften it out. It might take a little bit of time. If you're doing a slightly larger consistency or a larger area, should I say, you would be able to perhaps do this in your blender. But you can see that this is combining nicely. It's going to be thick to begin with, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of water to soften it out. Now what's going to happen when we paint this onto your fabric, it's going to need to dry, and it's going to look really weird while it's doing that. So some of the things that you need to expect is that once you start painting it onto your fabric, it's going to act as a resist. So wherever you have this starch or the flour and water mixed together and it's on your fabric and it's covering over the fabric, the paint is not going to penetrate through that. And that is why it is a flour and water resist, because it's going to resist the paint. I went to Zimbabwe many years ago, and what was happening there is that they did the most beautiful fabric tablecloths, but they used to often use this resist as a background. And there were some disused tennis courts there, and they used to lay the fabric out on the tennis courts and actually then go and work there. Nice and really hot there, not nice and hot, really hot, like 40 degrees or 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Celsius, and so it was really hot. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just take some of this resist and I'm going to start painting it onto my fabric. You can see it's really thick and goopy, and I'm not worried about too many brush strokes. What is going to happen is that because I'm working on some newspaper, the moisture from the resist is going to soak away into the newspaper below. So if it is really warm where you're working, you're going to find it's really going to be a little bit difficult sometimes to spread, but don't worry about that because you can just dip your brush in water and then carry on. But you want to get this on as fairly quickly and evenly as you possibly can, just so that you don't have too many problems with it drying before you want it to, if you are in a hot area. Obviously if you're in a cooler climate, it's not going to affect it. It is ideal to perhaps do this a day or so before you need to paint, because this will take a little bit of time to dry out. It is quite thick and goopy, and as you can see it looks as though it's lumpy on the surface, but remember that these lumps that are on the top can be smoothed out towards the end, and if they're sitting on top of the flour and water resist that is already there, it's not going to affect what happens to the fabric underneath. So don't worry about that. So you can be forgiving and just get this on as quickly as possible and then set it aside to dry. As I say, I like to do mine overnight, and then I don't actually sit and watch it, because we know what happens when you watch it. A pot trying to boil. Oopsie. There we go. So you just need to secure the edges, hold them down firmly, and your fabric is going to slightly stretch as it gets wet, which is why I haven't taped it down. You can work on boards that you've got sort of table tack or stencil glue on, but this is a smaller piece of fabric, so I'm not too worried about that. And certainly if you're doing a tablecloth, it's more difficult to secure it down because the fabric will shift a little bit. You will find that if it's got little dry spots like this, that you need to just cover them, because those will affect the design that you're working, and it will show up as dark blobs of paint once you actually come to paint your background color on. So I've now got this on fairly evenly, and I'm just going to dip my brush in a little bit of water and lightly coat over the surface, and immediately you can see what's happening is it's starting to smooth out these wrinkles. Remember that I said to you right in the very beginning, what happens is that the moisture from your flour and water resist starts soaking into the newsprint underneath, and it's quite difficult to get it on evenly then. So this really helps you do that. Just look out for these little blobs that haven't been covered well. Okay, so the water will dry away and we need to set this aside and let it do its work. So give me a second while I move this, and I have some others that I had prepared. So maybe not so easy to see on camera, but here is a design that I have already done. you will see that it almost looks like curled paper. And on this one, if you can see here, I've used a fork just to drag a pattern into the starch, just to see what happens. This one, on the other hand, I have just left completely plain. And I have here on a little palette that I've made some fabric paint. I started off with navy fabric paint, but it's a bit dark for what I want to do. So I mixed my fabric paint in with a little bit of extender, which is also known as clear cut or emulsion. And I have that now on my little palette, and I'm very happy with that. So here's the magic. Let's tackle the one that's actually plain to begin with. And because this has got starch, it's a bit like a wafer or a biscuit. You can just take it and you can crackle it. Can you hear that? Rather fun, this. So you can start to crack this so that it actually forms little veins. It's going to be nice to do this so that you can actually get the paint on evenly. Okay, so I'm just going to crackle this nicely. You'll see a little bit of this is going to fall off onto my table, but that's not serious. Just try and make sure that you've covered most of the surfaces, because you don't want to have one large area that suddenly hasn't been crackled right. So I'm going to get that a little bit flatter. And now what I'm going to do is to take my paint, and I'm taking a little sponge roller, and I'm simply just coating it in some of the fabric paint. I'm using a roller because I can roll over and it goes nice and quickly, but they are quite absorbent. And so I will be able to have enough paint on here to push into these cracks. So now I'm going to roll on. Look at that. Can you see how nicely that is starting to appear? Colors are showing up, so wherever the little veins are, that is what's going to show up on my fabric, not the big areas below. It's all the little veins is going to be where the color goes penetrating through into the fabric. That's why I need the roller to be able to push this color down into the material below. Okay, I need to get this more square onto my glass here, so let me just wipe this up so I don't get color on the reverse side of my fabric. Always be mindful of that. I would normally work on paper, but it is distracting when I'm trying to show you on video. Sorry, there we go. Right, so I'm just going to roll this on, and this is the really fun part. You can imagine if you've done a huge big tablecloth, you've had fun painting the design and the background is just too big and too laborious, and this would be a lovely way to fill it up. Also, if you're needing to do a lot of fabric in a hurry, it's great. So just make sure, as I said before, that you actually are pressing the color into these little veins. Then you're going to need to leave this and set it aside to dry. Now, because the paint itself is sitting not only in the veins, but on top of the starch as well, it would probably be best to leave this overnight to let everything just settle in nicely. And then what you do afterwards is on the reverse side, you iron with a hot dry iron. You can always put a piece of paper over the front part of your fabric just so that it doesn't stain your ironing board. It's unlikely to with the paint being dry, but if you're nervous, you can do that. And then once you've actually heat set your color, then you actually just take a knife and either scrape off this excess flour and water, or just pop it in a bowl of water and let it rinse off. The flour and water doesn't have any glue or any binders in it, so it's not going to actually stick that, it won't come off. So at the moment, it looks as though you've got a lot of brush strokes and things on your piece of fabric, but just remember that once you have rinsed off the flour and water, the design that's going to remain is the crackle part that's underneath. And if you have a look at the thumbnail on this video, you will get a good idea of what that's all about. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you have fun doing your own projects too. Look out for the other crackle methods that will be on my playlists. Bye for now.